Postman Pat and the Harvest Parcel.
Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van.
It had been a good summer in Greendale. In the valley, the fields of barley were golden ripe by the end of July. Pat met Peter Fogg on his way home. "You'll be wanting to get that barley in while this good weather lasts," said Pat. "I'm going for the combine first thing on Monday," said Peter. "Thanks for telling me," said Pat. "I'll be on the lookout for you." The combine harvester is so big that nothing can get past it on the narrow Greendale roads. Cars and vans and tractors have to get into a lay-by or gateway to let the combine go past. It's as big as a house, and the driver sits high up on top, like a captain on his ship. When Katie and Tom heard the combine was coming, they were very excited. Sometimes Peter would give them a ride on it, so high up that it was almost like flying. And later they could play lovely games with the bales of straw, jumping and hiding and making straw houses. The school holidays had begun, so they could play all day. There would be jugs of homemade lemonade and new strawberry jam and picnics by the hedge. They could hardly wait till Monday. Peter had to bring the combine from Pencaster, so he set off very early on Monday, before anyone else was awake in Greendale. Pat met him on the way back, just by the sharp bend up the hill from Greendale Farm. Pat had 2 seconds to get his van into the gateway when Peter came thundering past. "Morning, Peter," shouted Pat. Peter didn't hear a word, but he gave Pat a wave. Pat followed the combine to Greendale Farm and stopped behind it in the yard. When she was sure it was safe and everything had stopped moving, Mrs. Pottage let the twins out. They danced round Peter, both talking at once. "Can we have a ride? Can we come and watch? Can we have a picnic? Can we drive? Can we? Peter was all in a whirl. His ears were buzzing with the engine noise as well as with the twins' noise, so it was no wonder he looked dizzy. "Now you two leave Peter alone till he gets his wits back," said Mrs. Pottage. "And if you're very good and very careful, and do just as you're told, we'll all go to the field and see the combine and have a picnic." "And I'll come when I've delivered all my letters," said Pat, "and give a hand with loading the bales. I'll bring my sandwiches too, and I might save you a chocolate biscuit." "Ooh, goody!" shouted Katie and Tom. "But Peter's going first without us," said Mrs. Pottage, "and we're not going until he's done at least half the field, and there's a good safe part to play in. They're dangerous things, these harvesters, and we don't want any accidents." "Oh," said Katie and Tom. "One word more, and we'll not go at all," said Mrs. Pottage. "Please," said Katie, "can I wear my new jumper?" Mrs. Pottage turned to Pat. "It's the one Miss Hubbard knitted for the twins' birthday, with sheep all over it, and one black sheep on the tummy. They just love those jumpers. But you'll be too hot, love, far too hot." "Please," said Katie. "Oh, very well," said Mrs. Pottage. "It can go in my basket when you get too hot." Katie and Tom ran to get their jumpers to show Pat. "Lovely," said Pat, "but I'd best be on my way. See you later. Cheerio." Pat was on his way. As he called on the people of Greendale with their letters, he told them about the arrival of the combine at Greendale Farm. He called at Birkhow Holiday Cottage, where Mr. and Mrs. Cunliffe were staying for the week. "Will they mind if we come to watch?" said Mrs. Cunliffe. "Not at all," said Pat. "You'll be welcome." "I might be able to put it in my next book," said Mr. Cunliffe. "We'll bring a picnic," said Mrs. Cunliffe, "and we can give a hand too." "Great," said Pat. "Cheerio." Pat called at the church. "I'll pop round with my camera," said the Reverend Timms, "when I've finished my sermon for Sunday. Now do make sure they keep some sheaves for the harvest festival." Pat called at Thompson Ground. "We're too busy with our haymaking to come just now," said Dorothy, "but take them a tin of cakes with my love." Pat called on Granny Dryden. She was busy parcelling up a new jumper to send to little Yasmin in London. "Oh, Pat," said Granny Dryden, "I've gone and used up all me string, and I wanted to give you this parcel to put in the post today, to be in time for Yasmin's birthday. Now what shall I do?" "Don't worry," said Pat. "I'm sure to have some string in one of my pockets. Let's see now. Yes, here we are. Just the job." Pat helped Granny Dryden to tie her parcel up with some good post office knots and popped it in his bag. Then he told her about Peter bringing the combine and everyone going off to join in and give a hand with the harvest. "Oh, I love harvest time," she said. "Ever since I was a girl, I've never missed it. I'll have a stroll down this afternoon. I'm going to put some scones in the oven, and they're just the thing for a picnic." "Lovely," said Pat. "Bye." Pat called on George Lancaster at Intake Farm. "Hard-boiled eggs," said George. "I'll bring plenty for everyone." Pat called on Ted Glenn. "I know," said Ted. "I'll be down with the baler later on. I hope they keep those children out of harm's way till I've done." Pat called on Miss Hubbard. "They'll need plenty to drink," she said. "It's jolly thirsty work harvesting. I'll bring some cider and lemonade and a flask of tea on my bike." "You're making me feel thirsty now," said Pat. "Better stick to lemonade on duty," said Miss Hubbard. "Thanks," said Pat. "Delicious." "Have some ice," said Miss Hubbard. "This is the life," said Pat. Pat went on his way. He went all along the valley with his letters and parcels, and his good cat Jess went with him. And as his van and his bags became empty, he filled them up again. He collected new letters and parcels from farms and cottages, and he came back along the valley, opening the letter boxes, collecting more letters and cards. Then he took them all to Mrs. Goggins at the village post office. Jim would soon come over from Pencaster and take them away in his van. They would be sorted at Pencaster post office, then catch the train that night at Pencaster station, and off they would go on their way to all the people who were waiting the next day for their postman to call. When Pat had finished all his work for the day, he said, "Come on, Jess, time for a bite to eat. And let's see how they're getting on with that combine." It was like a party in that harvest field. They were all there. Mrs. Pottage was handing round sandwiches, Granny Dryden was going round with a basket of scones, and Miss Hubbard was pouring drinks. Katie and Tom and most of the children from the village were running and playing in the stubble. The Reverend Timms was taking pictures of everyone. Peter had almost finished cutting the corn. He had stopped to join in the picnic, and the combine stood quietly at the far side of the field. There was a trailer full of barley and long lines of straw lying across the field. Just as Pat sat down on a sunny patch of grass with a glass of cider and a newly baked scone, there was the sound of a tractor in the lane. "Look out, everyone," called Mrs. Pottage. "It's Ted with the baler. All to the sides of the field, please." The baler came rattling into the field behind Ted, and they all scurried to the hedges. "We don't want anyone getting baled up in a parcel of hay," said the Reverend Timms. "Where could we post them?" said Pat. "To Cornwall," said Peter. "Too corny for me," said Miss Hubbard. "Oh dear," said Peter. "I'd better get that combine and trailer out of the way." The binder rumbled round the field, gathering up the straw that the combine had left. It made the straw into neat parcels and tied them up with string, just like Granny Dryden's parcel. It left the straw bales spread out in lines across the field. When the binder had gone off to the far side of the big field, Katy said, "Please, Mum, can we play with the bales now?" "Well, if you keep over this side and well away from the baler," said Mrs. Pottage. "Promise?" "Promise, promise, promise," said all the children, and off they went, running and jumping amongst the bales. What lovely things they were to play with! You could hide behind them for hide and seek. You could jump from the top of them. If you asked Pat to help you lift them, you could build straw houses with them. You could build bridges and staircases and castles with them. You could slide down them, sit on them, creep under them, lie on them. The children did all these things and more, and they had a wonderful time. What they had forgotten, but were soon to remember, was that the little bits of straw made you itchy and prickly all over, so that you couldn't sit still one single minute. All those children would find themselves popped in the bath before bedtime, and they would cry out when the water stung in their scratches. "Ooh! Ow! It stings!" And how many mothers would say, "I told you so!" But smooth sheets and sleepy eyes would soon soothe all away and make them forget, and they'd be back tomorrow and all summer long, playing about the fields and the hedges and the barns and the streams and among the trees. It was getting late in the afternoon, and the trees were stretching their shadows far out across the great field. More than once Mrs. Pottage had called out, "Come on, children, time to go home." And more than once the children had shouted, "Just a bit longer." Miss Hubbard packed up and rode off on her bicycle, with her cider bottles clinking down the lane. Granny Dryden was off home to put the kettle on. And still the children played. The mothers came from the village to call their children home, and Katy and Tom were left at last alone, with Pat and Jess snoozing in the sun by the hedge, and Mrs. Pottage saying, "Now it really is time to go. Father will be back from market, and no tea ready for him." She was walking about picking up sandals and cups and paper napkins and plates and all the things that people had dropped and forgotten. Then she said, "Where is Katy's new woolly?" "And where is my hat?" said Pat, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Bless me, is it that time? We'll be missing our tea. Come on, Jess, help us to sniff out a hat and a woolly jumper." They searched all among the bales of straw. It was like looking in a maze, but search as they might, there was no sign of Pat's hat or Katy's jumper. Mrs. Pottage was cross. "Miss Hubbard spent a lot of time knitting that jumper, and then you go and lose it the first day on. Really, Katy." Katy looked as though she might begin to cry quite soon. "I have a feeling it'll turn up," said Pat. "Remember that time when Katy lost her doll? Detective Pat found it in the end." "Hi, what's that?" Pat was staring at a bale of straw as he was speaking. Between the ends of the straw he could see something blue. He poked his fingers into the straw and pulled at the tightly packed straw parcel. "What have you found, Pat?" said Tom. "Well, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you when I get this parcel open. I thought I'd finished with parcels for today. There's no address on it, so it's all right to open it." Pat took out his penknife and cut the string round the bale. He pushed his hand into the straw and pulled out a sleeve, a woolen sleeve. "Well, just look at this," said Pat. "Is it?" said Mrs. Pottage. "Katy's jumper?" said Pat. "I think so. Easy does it. We mustn't pull too hard. My goodness, this is a good parcel. Dry your eyes, Katy. Look, there are your sheep. It is your jumper. You must have dropped it when you were playing. and then it got baled up with a straw. It took a long time to get the jumper out of the bale, and it needed a good shaking, but it was all right. "Just look at that bale," said Mrs. Pottage. "Dad'll wonder what happened to it when he sees it." "What about Pat's hat?" said Katy. "It might be in another bale," said Tom. They looked at all the bales and felt them and poked them. There was no sign of Pat's hat. "Don't be sad, Pat," said Katy. "I'll find it for you." "It's all right," said Pat. "I can wear my old one. But wherever can it be?" They looked a little longer in the hedge and in the long grass at the edge of the field, but they didn't find it. So they all went home to tea. It was Katy who found Pat's hat in the end, but he had a long time to wait for it. It was in the winter, when the cornfield was covered in snow. Katy was helping Peter to put fresh straw out for the cows. Deep in the middle of another bale, there was Pat's hat, as good as new. Katy shouted just in time to stop Peter from putting his hay fork through the middle of it. He hadn't seen it. She took it into the house and asked Mum for a brush, and gave it a good cleaning. What a surprise Pat had when he came with the letters and saw his hat waiting for him. He was very pleased to see it. "I was just going to buy another for Best," said Pat. "Mind you, straw post is a bit slow, but it gets there in the end. Thanks, Katy. Cheerio." And Pat was on his way again.